All right, now this is something that I haven't done before. A lot of you have probably watched the videos on my channel. You'll see a lot of comedy. You'll see even some drama mixed in with some of the scenes I have there. And you'll see my educational content where I try to help people out, giving them the information I learned here on YouTube, and also giving information for actors, for directors, and for editors, and just all around filmmaking. I've been in this business for over 34 years, and to be honest, I've always thought about trying to do something that I haven't done before. Now, when I teach classes, a lot of times I tell actors to dig down deep and think about things that hurt you when you were young, things that hurt you when you were recently, things that hurt you from the past, the near past, the far past, but dig down. And that's where you'll find that emotion, that real emotion that you can use in your acting scenes. But comedians do the same thing. A lot of comedians come from troubled backgrounds. I mean, we know that by watching a lot of those comedian documentaries online. But this is something that I haven't done, and I've always thought about it. I wanted to talk just a little bit and see how it comes over to my YouTube audience. It's kind of outside of my wheelhouse, talking about my background, but there was a lot of trauma. But as I grew up, I realized that a lot of it was humor, dark humor. And I never knew why I was always drawn to dark humor, the sarcasm, the deeper meaning in humor. Drama with humor is something that I'm always attracted to. And as I said, as I grew older, I realized it was because of my background. You know, I come from a small town in New Jersey called Union. And there's a section of Union called Vauxhall. I remember one time, this is when I was older, I was just out of high school, and I had a job as a security officer, part-time. And one night, it was late at night, I called the radio station, and I won this radio call-in contest to name this song, and I won an album. But the funny thing about that was that the radio host said, "Now, I've been all over New Jersey, and I never heard of Vauxhall, but maybe I missed something." Then again, and he started laughing. But that was kind of true. Vauxhall was just a small section of Union, and it's where all the black residents lived. Now, it wasn't a bad area. Everybody had nice homes. They had nice lawns, mothers and fathers, cars. Everybody had jobs. This was in the 70s, mind you. And it was the real suburbs. When you watch television or movies of things in the 70s and you see the kids riding their bikes with the big sissy bars and all that kind of stuff, yeah, that was us. That was me and my friends hanging out on my friend's porch, talking, laughing, having fun. You know, it was a good time. But unknown to my friends and a lot of people in the neighborhood, my family, was the poorest family on the street. Now, like I said, I didn't realize the humor in this until I started getting older. And the dark humor, you know, when you look back on it. And I've been planning for many times to sit down and write a book about my childhood, because there's just so much humor, darkness, whatever you want to call it, struggle. You know, our family really struggled. First of all, we lived in a house that was set back way off of the main street. Now, the street was Maple Avenue, and all the rest of the houses were up on the curb where the sidewalk was. But for some reason, because our house was the oldest house on the street, it sat all the way back, literally about 2 football fields from all the rest of the houses. And it was a small house. It was, what was it? It was the living room, small living room. It was a 1-bedroom, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a kitchen. And so my mother, father, my 2 brothers and sisters, we lived there. But it wasn't just like your normal neighborhood, excuse all the flies. It wasn't just like a normal family. We hid all the trauma and the hard times that we constantly went through. Now, some of the stuff I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to be able to tell it all in this video, because I don't want to make this video 10 hours. But again, I'm telling this from the lens of my age now and looking back and seeing the humor in it. Because a lot of the problems that my parents had were easily fixed. They, for lack of a better word, they were screw ups. I have to admit it. They were screw ups. And even from a little kid, I knew that when I grow up, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, they were the perfect models for a kid to learn what not to do. So many reasons went into the troubles that they had, and the troubles that they put us through. I don't even really know where to begin, but I think I'll start here, just to give you a little example of what I'm talking about. There were times when we didn't have electricity. There were times when we didn't have water, and I'm telling you, this was in the 70s. This is all through the 70s. There was times we didn't have heat. There was times we didn't have food, and one of the biggest problems about the house was it was hooked up to the main water system, but when they didn't pay the bill, when they didn't have money to pay the water bill, the town wasn't kidding. The water department wasn't kidding. If your bill was overdue by 1 week, your water shut off, and they will not turn it back on until you raise the money to pay what's owed and a shut-on fee. So that was a consistent problem. That was number one. Number two was that our house was so back. Remember I mentioned our house was back about 2 football fields from the street. So it was way back. And I think it was that far back because it was built before the other houses were built. It had to be the oldest house on the street. There was no doubt about it. Oldest and smallest. And the kids would joke, which I had never heard about it until I had left and went to college, because my brother and sister, they had more friends, a wider range of friends than I did. And the joke was, which I never even knew about, the Tuckers live in a garage. You can see their house. You can barely see their house from the street. They lived back there in a little shacky garage, and that was like to go and joke. But my brother and sister were tough. They took it in stride, and they were their own people. They were outsiders. They embraced being different, and they were different, and they had tons of friends. I was kind of a loner, and I think it was because I was the oldest, and so I went through the most. By the time my brothers and sisters were old enough to realize that something wasn't right, my parents did start to get together a little bit, much more than when I was young. And one of the quick stories I wanted to talk about, I guess also to set that up, is like I mentioned, the house was so far back, it was off of the sewer system. Now that was a problem. That was a big problem, because our house was the only house probably in town that still had a septic tank. And this is not the country. This is not down in, in the country where there's no water systems and sewer systems. This was in a major city. And our house had went all that time, and weren't connected to the main sewer system. So it doesn't sound like much of a problem, does it? But it's a real big problem when you can't pay to have the septic tank emptied. And that happened to us a lot, many times. So I'm not gonna get into the details, but you can use your imagination about what had to happen if you couldn't flush your toilet, and for weeks at a time. So my parents handled that situation. That's one situation they didn't make us handle, thank God. They took care of the cleanup necessary as much as they could. But there were so many issues. And again, as an adult, as an older man now, both my parents have passed away, because I never spoke about this when they were alive. And I think I should have talked to them about it. I would love to know why they let themselves get in that same situation over and over and over. And it wasn't because they were illiterate. They both knew how to read and write. They both held various jobs. My father was a bus driver for a long time until he got into a problem drinking and lost his license, and then there goes the bus job. But he had skills. He had skills as a carpenter, and I learned some of that from him too. That's maybe one of the only things I learned from him. But it was something. It was something else. And again, this is dark humor. And these are the things that shape you. And these are the stories that actors can dig into when you're working on a character. Now, it doesn't have to be extreme as what I went through. It doesn't have to be as extreme, and I'm going to tell you more in the next episode. But it doesn't have to be as extreme as my situation. You know, everybody goes through something. All kids go through something. No parents are perfect. No family is perfect. No matter how good it looks from the outside, no one's family is perfect. No matter how much money your father may make, no matter how much money your mom makes, everybody has problems. But when the problems are compounded and they start affecting your kids' day-to-day lives, like having food, you know, just the basic necessities, like having electricity on, having, heat on in the winter, having, just the basics of life, having a bathroom that actually works. A lot of my friends never knew this, and they're going to see it now. They're going to learn it now because a lot of my friends watch my YouTube channel. And I'm, it's content that I've used in my life as an actor. And that's what drives me to open up. I want to reach out to you other actors out there, and the stories, the pain, the good times, the bad times, all those are material that you can use to make your characters come to life. Now, I've used my troubles, and these are materials you're using hidden underneath. When you do a character background or a character bio, and you decide, why is he like this? Why is he like that? And sometimes I marble some of the stuff, from my real life into my character. And that makes my characters believable. That makes my characters three-dimensional. That makes my characters something that you can look at and say, hey, he's real. Oh, hey, that's pretty good. Or even if you're a small part, it's a solid, believable character. It's not one-dimensional, because every character has a beginning, middle, and ultimately an end. And you can use those things from your life to propel your character, to propel you in a situation. And this information is not just useful for actors. Musicians do it all the time, singing about what happened to them, singing about especially country music, singing about their stories, the hard times, the sad times. Now I'm thinking of Kenny Rogers. But again, I'm doing this very first one to see how the response is, because I have so many stories. And it's from a humorous point now. I let go of the pain, and I use that feelings, the trauma, the embarrassment, the shame that you get from growing up poor, especially when you know about it. Like I said, my brothers and sisters were so little, they really didn't go through the hardest of the hard times that I had to suffer with my parents. And I'm going to close this story out too by telling another big curveball that I use from time to time in my acting. Unbeknownst to me, my mother had me before she married my stepfather. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that until I was probably in my 30s. It's hard to believe, but everybody, and sometimes people say they can't be conspiracies, but everybody in my family knew. And they were so dedicated, I guess that's the word, to my mother, that they never told me until I was probably like my early 30s, I found out, or late 20s. But someone who finally told was my aunt. She finally said, I have something to tell you. And she told me the truth, And this is just the beginning of a story that, like I said, is humorous. It really is, because you can't have anger about stuff like this. Like I said, my mom passed away about almost a year ago, and my father had passed away. My stepfather passed away probably like 6 years before that. But as a child, I always knew that I didn't fit in. I mean, with my father's family. I was the outsider. And they all knew. Their kids knew. But it's like I was the big one that didn't know anything, you know. But honestly, I did know. I felt it. I felt there was something where I wasn't part of this, because it was all madness. My father's brothers were all alcoholics. Um, they, didn't have functional relationships with women. Um, just just crazy stuff. Just crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. And I use that stuff in my writing. I've written a lot of scripts, and I always bring characters in that come from these troubled backgrounds, that live in their current life because of how they grew up, because of where they came from, because of the troubles they had and they had to fight through to live and to survive. But it's interesting when I start talking about this, because this is something that I didn't talk about, And then I look at my life and I see certain things that I do, as a husband and a father, that that must be because of how I grew up, because of the family I was in. And then a lot of times I think, once I found out that I had a father who I had never met, and he tried to meet me. Years later, my mother told my wife, because my wife got close with my mother. But I always had a strained relationship with my mother. And I'm going to get into some of those stories down the line, too. Again, it's of a place of dark humor. It's of a place of dark humor. And that's why I'm drawn to that. That's why something because my wife asks me sometimes, why do you like to watch these dark characters? These dark but humorous characters. Because even on television, when a character is dark, there's something to him that's humorous. There's like House of Cards, one of my favorite shows. Frank Underwood, one of the best characters. Sopranos, they're the bad guy, but you're still drawn to them. And that's how I grew up with my mother. My father really, since he wasn't my real father, and I came to, once I found that out, then I began to realize why he was so standoffish, why he was closer with the other children than me. But it was basically, I survived. And sometimes I wonder how my life would have turned out if I had went with my biological father. He went to college. He ended up obviously having his own family and his own kids, and they went to college. And, I don't know much about their lives, but I know they had the normal, traditional life, growing up. Not what we went through. It's interesting to talk about this. And I will see, like I said, I will see how this plays out, if anybody is receptive to it. If anyone who wants to hear more, then I'll do more, because I have a buttload of trauma stories, but with humor. You look back on it and you got to laugh, because there's nothing else you can do but laugh. And when you talk about things that have affected you, and sometimes you see that those things still affect you to this day, and you can't let go of certain things. It's crazy. It really is. But for you actors out there, for you creatives, for you anybody who needs something to draw on, to release feelings or ideas, and especially I refer more to actors because I am an actor, been an actor for like 34 years. That is valuable. That is valuable. You draw on your experiences, because you can't really be a good actor if you don't have anything to draw upon. That's the techniques that I use. I take a role and I incorporate it into me and bring the character to life. Because most of the time, the truth is, you just get a script with a character that might have some dimensions, but most of the characters don't have as many dimensions as the actor is expected to bring to it. So if you have a rich background, it doesn't have to be trauma, because everyone doesn't have trauma when they're a child, but some do, and some have much more than I had. But again, it's not wasted. Your pain and your suffering, it doesn't have to be wasted. And even if you're not in the entertainment business, you can go on to be a big brother or a big sister and help kids who may be going through the same thing you're going through right now. Because as I speak, there are children going through the same thing that I went through 40 years ago, 45 years ago. And they're going through the same trauma, and it's going to affect them as they get older. And you don't want it to define your life. And that's one thing I did not let it do. I did not let it define my life. I knew that I didn't belong there. I knew that I wasn't part of that. No one would admit it until I was older, but I just somehow knew I did not fit in. I was not supposed to be there. I was trapped, but I made it through. And I'll talk more about this if I decide to do another episode. I want to see how the response of my subscribers are, because what you go through can be of use. It doesn't have to be in vain. It never has to be in vain. I'll see you in the next one.